Hello everybody, I'm Joel Godi, the founder of NeuroGifted. At NeuroGifted, we promote neuroinclusion in both workplaces and educational settings. I'm really happy to be here today and be a witness to the spectacular growth of the neurodiversity movement in India in recent years. This is the third edition of this summit, and I clearly recall when it made its humble beginnings a few years earlier. This summit has been instrumental in bringing together neurodivergent voices from India as well as across the globe, and I believe it will continue to serve as a catalyst for this movement in the years ahead. I thank the organizers of the Neurodiversity India Summit for putting together this wonderful platform for learning and sharing and amplifying the voices of this community. I am proud to be part of this gathering today, and a special mention of appreciation for Usha Rengaraju and what I can imagine is an absolutely amazing team for this effort. As I pondered on what would be a good theme to speak about for this summit, I began to reminisce about all the developments that took place in the neurodiversity space across the world in the last year, across geographies, societies, and cultures. So if you look at it objectively, this has been a very special year. There was so much caring and sharing within a motivated neurodivergent community like never before. We've had collaborations like never before. We've seen activities like never before. There was a lot of cross-cultural learnings too. Basically, it felt like new life. I noticed that post-pandemic, the neurodivergent community across the world has emerged more stronger and more purposeful than ever before. I believe that now, as a movement, we have reached a stage of irreversibility. That is a point of no return where the only way is the way forward towards full neuroinclusion, the way it was always supposed to be. Which brings us to our topic, neuroinclusion and culture. That is what I'm going to talk about today. With this little presentation, I hope to give you some new perspectives and understandings of this subject. So let's move on. Neurodiversity has always existed. It is not a recent development as some people would like to believe. But what is interesting is the way in which neurodiversity was viewed by different societies across geographies owing to the prevailing culture of that time. Now, my attempt here is to put forward a certain perspective on the origins of systemic neuro exclusion and how it came to be what it is today. But first, what is neurodiversity? The term neurodiversity was first coined by an Australian sociologist named Judy Singer in 1997, basically to promote equality and inclusion of the neurological minorities. Eventually, it came to be accepted globally to represent a social movement for the rights of the neurodivergent population across the globe. So, neurodiversity basically represents the infinite variations of the human brain, including conditions like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette's, bipolar, OCD, and others. In this context, people can be classified into two broad categories. That is the neurotypicals, who form the majority 80% of the population, and neurodivergents, who make up the remaining 20%. So the argument is that the brain variations are a natural part of human diversity, that these variations are essential and inalienable component of the human species forms the crux of that argument. Neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. So there is no one right way of thinking, one right way of learning or behaving, and differences should not be viewed as deficits. So it's important to note that these variations in brain design often affect how the neurodivergent brain functions. This also means that neurodivergence may have strengths and challenges that differ from that of neurotypicals. So let's now look at some facts. The global population limit hit 8 billion in November 2022. That means an estimated 20% of this population are neurodivergent, which is 1.6 billion neurodivergent people across the world. Now, for us here in India, what must concern us is that 18% of the world population lives here in India. Well, that would mean that a neurodivergent population of 288 million or 28.8 crores. This is not a small number by any means. That's something to think about. So, neurodivergent people have always existed throughout the ages. In fact, people with distinct abilities were actually recognized and sometimes even celebrated. In ancient Greece, stories emerged from a belief that neurodivergence signified a special connection with the gods. In the case of seers, their neurodivergence manifested as an ability to predict future events, a little superpower in those days, for example. I would recommend David Frauenfelder's guidebook, Zeus is My Type, in which he takes 16 gods and goddesses from Greek mythology and analyzes them for their personalities and neurodivergence. It could be interesting reading for those who are interested. Similarly, even in other cultures, we see this recurrence of the same pattern, where certain humans were recognized for special abilities and characteristics. So for lack of time, we're not going to go deeper into this, but it's an interesting area for those who would like to do some research on this. The point is that neurodivergence is an integral and essential part of the human evolution story, without which we wouldn't be here today. In fact, every discovery, every invention that changed the world is the result of someone who thought differently. Now that's something to register. As per recorded history, things began to change in the early 300 ADs during the reign of Constantine, the Roman emperor. This is when systemic exclusion of neurodivergence actually originated. The religious influence of those times resulted in neurodivergence being viewed as morally deficient individuals. They understood them as mentally ill or evil or possessed or people under a curse or even punished by the gods. Of course, there was some form of exclusion happening in other cultures too, but nothing on this scale and nothing so systematically as it was done here. Now, finally, in the late 1700s, that is about 1400 years later, change in this way of thinking was influenced by Sir Alexander Crichton, a Scottish physician who propagated that neurodivergence did not occur due to the individual's failing, but it was actually the natural difference of the brain, which was totally out of the individual's control. Now, when we look at the Indian context, our history is full of renowned people who had distinct strengths and challenges, and we have always celebrated them. There is no evidence of systemic exclusion in Indian culture. Yes, there were some localized beliefs that may have resulted in misunderstanding and fear, but in general, neurodivergence was accepted and celebrated in the local culture. Then the advent of the British education system in India that came in the 1800s brought a certain way of regimented, an academic structure which was totally alien to the traditional ways of learning in the subcontinent. This system is peculiar, and its academic learning and evaluation methods was naturally exclusive in nature, where neurodivergence could not fit in and function in this kind of an environment. The same was happening parallelly in other parts of the globe under the same education system. This eventually resulted in systemic exclusion of neurodivergence from the education process itself, and therefore by extension from society, workplaces, and all other avenues. The truth is, exclusion for neurodivergence from the human gene pool is detrimental for the survival of the human species itself. By systematically excluding neurodivergence, we have been ignorantly stunting our own growth. If you're thinking how that's possible, let's look at this theory. Here is how how it's generally represented, neurotypical versus neurodivergent cognitive profiles. The blue line that you see here represents the neurotypical cognitive profile, where you can notice very easily that they are good in some tasks and not so good in some tasks. And basically what it shows is that there is some kind of balance there, not too much of variation. So the individual may be having an ability to do a large number of tasks, without much support, but up to a certain level. But when you look at the neurodivergence profile, you will see that the variations are much higher extent. You will find that you will find peaks and troughs, and the peaks represent the areas where the individual is very good or outstandingly good at something, and the troughs depict areas where they may be very poor and may even need some support in these cases. So the cognitive profiles of neurodivergence and neurotypicals are very clearly different from each other. But when we look at it in this linear way, there's nothing really we can understand from this, or it's not really conveying what it is meant to convey. But if I change, for today, I'm going to change it into a circular graph, just to give you an idea of how we can understand this, how we can make the argument. The center circle, of course, represents the areas where the individual is very poor. The middle circle represents the areas where people are average or good. And then the outer circle represents the areas where people are extraordinary or outstanding in some abilities. Now, when you put a neurotypical profile into this circle, what you see is that their profile more or less falls into the middle band, which is the typical band. And as you keep increasing more and more people, or as you look at more and more people, what you get is just more people within the same band. And that goes on as you keep adding people into the group. So ultimately what you get is something like a large number of people who represent certain abilities, cognitive abilities as a group, which fall within the same band. But when you bring in neurodivergence into the pool, into this group, what you get is different types of variations, different types of cognitive abilities coming into this pool and adding value to this pool. And when you reach a sizable number, in this case, the global population is 20%, what you end up with is an entire group of people whose combined cognitive ability is increased, much larger than the original group of just neurotypicals. So this is one argument to say that neurodivergence and neurotypicals are actually meant to be together. And this is how, as a society, as a species, we humans have evolved throughout history. And you see where we are today. So it is meant to be this way. And neurotypicals and neurodivergence work very well together. But it's only in the recent past that we have begun to eliminate and exclude the neurodivergence from our societies. So what I'm trying to say, that it's all about the environment. Alexander Denhier has this quote, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. That's something to think about. Neurodivergents today are fighting for their rights within society, in education, in employment. And it's time to relook the environment that we have created ourselves in such a way that it suits only a certain section of people, that is the majority of people, and it in a way naturally excludes the neurodivergent population. So what am I saying today? I'm talking about neuro-inclusion, going back to the days of old where inclusion was the way of life for humans. Steve Silberman, in his book Neurotribes, suggests that neurodivergent people do not suffer from disability. They suffer from difficulties created by a society that fails to accommodate cognitive differences. I urge you to think about that. Now, when we talk of neuro-inclusion, the first thing that I want to put forth, or one of the biggest challenges to neuro-inclusion, is monoculture, where assimilation is valued over integration. Societies today are actively trying to become monocultures. This development is quite likely to be seen as positive, supportive, and good overall, particularly by the people living and benefiting in them. Consider notions such as culture fit or shared values when seeking relationships. On the surface, this can seem rather nice. Who doesn't want to live with people who share your values? But these can easily be used to exclude and marginalize those who don't quite share the same outlook, who present ideas a little off the beaten path, or who bring different experiences to the table. And that means it is a culture that works naturally against diversity. Now, monoculture practice is not accidental. There are, of course, plenty of benefits achieved by uniformity. For example, selecting one crop that will thrive best in the local environment enables high productivity and efficiency. We all know that. So while having the same kind of people, those who think like you, act like you, or feel like you all around you in your societies and workplaces may seem desirable and comfortable, there is also a flip side. Monocultures introduce certain risks. For example, what if that singular crop falls prey to pest infestation? Or if the environmental needs of that particular crop are not met due to climatic variability? It's the same with humans, with human societies. With change being a constant, we need each other, neurotypicals and neurodivergents. In fact, all of us, as we progress into the future and face new challenges as a species, we need each other to balance that. So, it is natural for any society and culture to self-amplify. That is, to become ever more like what it is. This tendency to self-amplify is a silent killer of effectiveness. By excluding those who think differently, we're stunting our own growth and progression. Over time, this process results in entirely homogeneous people, and as a species, we lose the ability to change and adapt to new conditions. The longer the self-amplification cycle lasts, the more ingrained it becomes. Therefore, the argument for attacking it as early as possible. Neuro-inclusion as a practice can save humanity from the danger of self-amplification and also monoculture. So the question in everybody's mind is, so what can we do as a people to ensure that we revert to the inclusive stories of old? How can we help create neuro-inclusive culture? Building culture is a long-drawn process. While there is no one perfect way to do it, there are, however, essential actions that can be undertaken at different levels by different people, which will ensure that our society is well on the pathway to true neuro-inclusion. First, of course, it's always good to start with building awareness about neurodiversity and the importance of neuro-inclusion. Awareness building helps remove many of the misconceptions and biases associated with neurodivergent conditions. Now, this awareness can help remove the barriers that exist in our system so that neurodivergents can have their rightful access to education, good health, livelihood, financial independence, dignity, and quality of life. Awareness of how neurodivergents operate in this world can also enable better partnerships and collaborations. This helps improve our educational and workplace systems and processes to be more inclusive. Now, awareness is great, but it's not enough. Unless we create a culture of psychological safety for everyone, not just neurodivergent people, but everyone, we will not get to the place of seeing results. Neuroinclusion requires a shift in mindset. We have to change the culture from the inside out. We have to be willing to look at everything and turn everything upside down to make it work. In the end, awareness must lead to intentional action. Otherwise, there's no point in building awareness. It must lead to intentional action. The next, wherever you are, maybe in an organization or in a school or in the government or in a position of privilege or power, you can always use your position to advocate for the right of neurodivergence by pushing for specific policies and laws to support neurodivergent individuals, as you do for any other minority groups like gender, race, ethnicity, etc. Next, community engagement. This is very critical for neuroinclusion. Community engagement means working collaboratively with and through neurodivergent groups to address issues affecting their well-being. This can be a powerful vehicle for bringing about environmental and behavioral changes in culture. Next, normalize neuroinclusion. Why am I saying this and what do I mean? Neuroinclusion is not a favor. This is not a charity proposition. It is just as essential and important for the rest of the neurotypical population, for their very survival, for our collective survival as a human species. So don't approach neuroinclusion as some kind of a special project. We are only correcting a wrong from the past and giving back neurodivergence their rightful space in this world. So always look at neuroinclusion as the obvious and the most natural thing to be done. Then, of course, for those who are touched by this and those who are interested in neuroinclusion, I would say, be an ally. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever age group, whatever gender, it doesn't really matter. Just be an ally if you really believe in neuroinclusion and understand its importance. This is a very noble and rewarding cause. It is also enriching to your community. As an ally, you can use your privilege and work in partnership with the neurodivergent community to remove the barriers that challenge the group's rights and provide equal access and opportunity for them to thrive in all aspects of our society. In parting, I would like to say a few words. Neuroinclusion benefits everybody. Let me repeat that. Neuroinclusion benefits everybody. Neurodivergence as well as neurotypicals are largely benefited through neuroinclusion. Accommodations and adjustments made for neurodivergence are also appreciated by neurotypicals. We know that from 20 years of experience, correct? So whatever you do, wherever you implement neuroinclusion, you will find that it benefits, that measure benefits everybody. So in the end, everybody wins through neuroinclusion. That's the point I'm trying to make. And Of course, thank you very much for this opportunity. And once again, I hope that this session was beneficial to you. Enjoy the rest of the summit. See you later. Bye-bye.